Oh, Grady, you're so fine, you blow my mind. Hey, Grady. Hey, Grady. Actually, I don't know what Grady Hendrix really looks like. Oh, that answers that question. If Stephen King is the king of horror and Joe Hill is his literary heir apparent, then perhaps think of Grady Hendrix as the little brother who was stealing your wallet while making you laugh over nostalgia and his sometimes problematic sense of humor. Okay, everybody, we need to talk about Grady Hendrix. My journey with Grady Hendrix began the day I saw this cover for We Sold Our Souls. Yeah, I may have been going through a Metalocalypse or a Gresco phase, whatever. I didn't get to rebel in high school, so I did it in my 30s. We Sold Our Souls is the last Grady Hendrix books that I have ever read. Well, of his fictional books, that is. We're not counting Paperbacks from Hell. If you've seen my Storygraph, you know I am preparing to be the oldest Scream Queen in history. That's right, Jamie Lee Curtis. I'm coming for you. I'm doing my research. But no, really, I just like horror. I was really rather sheltered growing up, so checking out supposedly sex and curse-laced Christopher Pike's books from the school library was kind of the most rebellious thing I ever really did. Never mind that my mother was offering me Danielle Still and Michael Crichton books to read. Where were we? Oh, yeah, Grady Hendrix. My actual first Grady Hendrix book was A Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. And then my journey temporarily has ended when I finished this last week, We Sold Our Souls. I say temporarily because he has another book coming out. I misidentified it as coming out this next month here in July of 2022 because that's what Goodreads has listed. The reality is all other sellers of this book have it listed for coming out in January of 2023. I'm a little disappointed. Wait, let me stop. I'm getting ahead of myself. There are a few ways I can discuss these books. The order they came out in, the order of their sales, or I can discuss them in the order I read them in. I guess before I make a choice on discussion order, we should talk about why we need to talk about Grady Hendrix books. The answer is, we don't. Well, technically. They are horror books written by a straight white male. It's a point of view that dominates this genre and the majority of publishing history. So why do I want to talk about Grady Hendrix? I'm a Southerner. I'm a Southerner who likes horror. I'm fascinated by his commentary on mostly Southern middle-class society and his change and growth as an author over the course of, however many novels this is. Most people know Grady Hendrix from his breakaway best-selling book, Horrorstör. It's extremely tongue-in-cheek, meant to make fun of capitalism. There is no hiding it. Yeah, it's essentially an IKEA store that's haunted. The book is filled with these great graphics that go from just, harmless furniture into torture devices at some point. The metaphors are extremely ham-fisted. The audiobook hilariously has Bronson Pinchot reading titles and the names of various pieces of furniture and their uses. But I will say, if you're going to read it, you need to read the physical copy. You need to see the infographics. If all you have is the audiobook, a lot of the humor is gonna fall flat and a lot of the metaphors are gonna seem even more ham-fisted. Horrorstör lays out a lot of the characteristics that Grady Hendrix is known for in his books. He always writes leading ladies. In fact, his latest book is called The Final Girls Support Group because that's what he writes. Final girls. Every single one of his books delves into a different type of horror genre. You have possession, slasher, vampire. Several of his books slightly tip into the zombie genre. All of them have some sort of supernatural twist. What all of them do have is a touch of nostalgia. His first big book, My Best Friend's Exorcism, takes place in the 1980s and, of course, follows along with a typical exorcism type trope where you have a friend who's possessed and taken over. A lot of the same steps that horror books of this genre go through, this book goes through. What makes it extremely unique is that it is extremely character driven. It is the friendship between the two main characters that wants to help you move along and keep reading. This is also, as one of his earlier books, one that has some of the most problematic elements in it. One of the main characters talks about in the 80s dressing up in blackface for a school project. It's not done in a casual way. It's very clear when you're reading it that it's to make a point. However, it's also clear that as he's grown as a writer up until his latest release, he's gotten further away from those things that a lot of people have found questionable about some of his previous work. It's great when people want to make a point or want to reflect a time period, but when you're just using it as flavor in the background, it just makes you want to ask, but why? After My Best Friend's Exorcism, we have We Sold Our Souls. And this book, as I said, coming out in 2018, it's full of nostalgic metal references, especially if you're a kid of the 90s. Each Grady Hendrix book tends to hitch itself to a decade and theme and goes into a deep dive of that culture and time period. For My Best Friend's Exorcism, it is, of course, the 1980s and especially the pop music of that time period. Each chapter is named after a popular song. We Sold Our Souls, as I previously mentioned, hinges on metal. Not just of the 1980s hair bands or death metal or any particular genre, it does spread itself out a little bit more. However, because it deals with a band that sold its soul to the devil back in the 1990s, obviously it's a little bit more around that culture, as well as the early to mid 2000s. A Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires is really almost a misnomer of a title. And I will say, as far as titles go, it sets you up expecting one thing from this book when you get another. As I've previously stated, Grady Hendrix books hinge on three main things: nostalgia, cultural zeitgeist, and character-driven stories. In the case of A Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, it's about a book club of mothers in the 1990s. It was definitely the book that I could relate to as the mother and as a kid of the 90s. But at the same time, I had a lot of problems with it. The whole point of the book is to talk about the rampant misogyny and sexism that is existing in this time period. The whole point is about how women were not being heard. A lot of the themes of this book are how humans are more the monsters than necessarily the monsters themselves, or how humans perpetuate or propagate or support the monsters within society. Grady Hendrix was attempting to make social commentary about the position of race within society and moms wanting to be moms no matter the race of a child. However, it really does fall secondary and flat given everything that else happens. Plus, being horror, there are some trigger warnings that go along with some of his books. Now juxtapose that with his latest installment, The Final Girls Support Group, where you have openly gay main characters. However, there is one of them that still falls into the kill your gays trope. You have a book that follows almost predictable storylines that I swear I've seen on an episode of Psych. And yet, for anyone who enjoys slasher films, it is something that you can really appreciate and enjoy that obviously he loves as well. And I think that's the crux of Grady Hendrix books. He uses our desire for nostalgia, and if you want to say it, nostalgia bait, in order to bring us character-driven stories that tend to be female-centric. These are just some of my thoughts on Grady Hendrix books. There's so much more that could be said about each one individually. There's a lot of more problems that could be discussed. There's a lot that he does well that can be discussed. What are your thoughts about Grady Hendrix books? I would love to hear them down in the comments. I would like to thank my latest subscribers to the channel. And make sure that you go ahead and join them by hitting the like button and subscribe, and of course the notification bell.
That Zoom.